So we are in this weird time right now where people have the ability to work from anywhere they want, but there's also some pushback from managers who want everyone back in the office. So what does the future look like? Will it be remote, hybrid, or something else entirely? Well, we don't know for sure, but we can make an educated guess by looking at a few different trends. And that's what I want to talk about in this video, the 3 big trends that will determine whether the future is remote, hybrid, or something else. Also, if you're new here and you're interested in this kind of stuff, then consider subscribing because I put out videos like this every week. Okay, so let's start with trend No. 1, which is how much autonomy employees want. So this one is pretty obvious because we've been hearing about employee burnout and mental health challenges for the past few years now. But I think we're at a tipping point where employees aren't just gonna not accept the same old way of working. They want more flexibility, more autonomy over when and where they work. And this has been highlighted even further with the events of the past year and a half. For example, just recently, I was talking to someone who works at a large tech company in the Bay Area. He was telling me that his company is trying to bring everyone back to the office, but he doesn't want to do that. And even if they revoke his remote work status, he's willing to quit. It's actually crazy to me how far this has come because pre-COVID, employers had all the leverage. If you didn't want to go into the office, then you were probably not gonna get hired. Now employees have all the leverage, employers are begging them to come back to the office, but they don't want to. This is a pretty extreme example, but I think it really shows how things have shifted. People no longer want to be told when, where, and how to work. They want more flexibility. And I think this is a big reason why fully remote companies are able to attract top talent. Like take for example, Zapier, they're a great place to work, but their entire business model is based on remote work. That is why they were able to hire the best people in the world, because they can offer something that other companies can't: unlimited vacation time, unlimited sick time, fully remote work, very competitive salaries. These are the kinds of perks that make Zapier attractive to many people because it gives them more autonomy over their lives. In the future, I think we're going to see more companies adopt this mindset because the alternative is that they lose out to competitors who do. Alright, now the second trend that will determine whether the future is remote or hybrid is how productive people are when they work remotely. And I think this is an important discussion to have because there are a lot of opinions and misconceptions around this topic. I'll give my opinion first and then we'll go through some data points. My opinion is that remote workers are just as productive, if not more productive than office workers. Let's take a step back and think about why this might be the case. A lot of office work is made up of meetings. Think about it, a lot of your day is spent in meetings, collaborating with others, getting feedback, brainstorming ideas. All these activities can easily be done over video conference or instant messaging tools. And if anything, I would argue that remote workers are better at doing this because they have to be. When you work remotely, you have to be able to communicate effectively with people asynchronously because you're probably not gonna be online at the same time as everyone else. So you have to get used to writing detailed messages and making sure that everything is documented in writing. At the end of the day, communication is still happening. It might just be happening via different channels. Now, the only real way to measure productivity is to actually measure output, but a lot of companies don't do this. What they do instead is micromanage their employees, and that usually ends up hurting morale. But if you actually want to get a sense of how productive remote workers are, you should check out this study from Stanford. It was published a few months ago, and they found that when workers were allowed to work from home, their productivity actually went up by 13%. Now, of course, this is just one study and it might not be completely accurate. But I think it makes a good point, which is that if you actually want to get a sense of how productive remote workers are, you should probably measure output instead of hours worked. Now, before we move on to the third trend, I wanted to mention that there's a big misconception that remote work is cheaper for companies, but that might not actually be true. For example, according to Global Workplace Analytics, companies save an average of $11,000 per half-day remote worker per year. But this is before accounting for any added benefits that remote workers receive, which is exactly what we did at Zapier. We calculated the total cost of employment for both remote and non-remote workers, and we found that the fully remote model actually ends up being more expensive for us. We have to pay more in salaries and benefits to compete for the same talent. That's why we offer unlimited paid time off, 8 weeks of parental leave, and 8 weeks of paid medical leave. We need to offer these kinds of perks to compete. So I don't know about you, but I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think remote workers are more or less productive than office workers? Leave a comment down below. Alright, now the third trend that will determine whether the future is remote or hybrid is whether knowledge work can continue to scale. And this one is a little bit more speculative, but I think it is worth discussing because the future of work is ultimately tied to the future of our economy. So here's what I mean. Over the past decade, we've seen a lot of hype around knowledge work and how it is becoming more and more important. Jason Fried, the CEO of Basecamp, defines knowledge work as any type of work that involves problem solving and creating new things. And he believes that this is going to be the dominant form of work in the future. I agree with him for the most part, but I think we need to make a distinction between two types of knowledge work: codified knowledge and tacit knowledge. Codified knowledge is any type of knowledge that can be written down or recorded. So this includes things like blogs, YouTube videos, and textbooks. Tacit knowledge, on the other hand, is any type of knowledge that can't be written down. It's the kind of knowledge that you acquire through experience and expertise. An example of this is knowing how to ride a bike. You can't really write down how to ride a bike, you just have to learn it for yourself. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I think it will become increasingly easy to codify knowledge work in the future. As AI gets better, it will become easier and easier to automate tasks that require codified knowledge. But tacit knowledge, that's a whole another story. You can't just automate tacit knowledge. It requires human intuition and experience. So I think the future will favor people who are able to develop tacit knowledge and expertise. For example, as more and more routine tasks get automated, I think there will be a growing demand for people who can help debug these systems when they break down. Or as more and more content gets created, I think there will be a growing demand for people who can curate and filter through all the noise. Basically, I think the future will favor people who can add value at the edges of what machines can do. Okay, so now that we've talked about the three main trends, let's go through some potential outcomes. So the first outcome is what I would call fully remote. This is when a company decides to let all of their employees work remotely forever. This could be because they're fully distributed, they have employees all over the world, or they just embrace the idea of lifelong learning and they want to give their employees the freedom to explore new career paths. But the problem with this approach is that it can lead to disengaged employees. When people don't have a physical space to connect with colleagues, they can start feeling isolated and lonely. So this approach might work for some companies and some people, but it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. The second outcome is what I would call fully hybrid. This is when a company decides to let some of their employees work remotely while bringing other employees back to the office. The problem with this approach is that it can lead to inequality. Employees who are forced to come into the office might feel resentment towards those who get to work from home. There can also be inequality across teams where some teams get to work remotely and others don't. But the third outcome is what I would call outcome-focused. This is when a company only cares about results and not how those results are achieved. So employees have the freedom to decide how and where they work as long as they hit their targets. This approach has a lot of benefits. First, it gives employees the freedom to decide how and where they work. Second, it gives managers the freedom to decide what targets they want to set. Third, it gives the company the freedom to hire the best talent in the world regardless of where they live. But the problem with this approach is that it requires a lot of trust. Managers have to trust their employees to hit their targets, and employees have to trust that their managers won't and punish them for not coming into the office. I'm curious, what do you think the future of work will look like? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe because I put out videos like this every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.